What do you do when the person who raised you, the one who taught you right from wrong, leaves behind a final message so brutal, so cutting, that it splits your soul in half? What if that message wasn't whispered or hidden quietly away, but read aloud in front of everyone you've ever loved? That's exactly what happened to Tracy Reiner. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was supposed to be a moment of mourning, of remembrance, of unity. A private family gathering just days after the passing of the legendary Rob Reiner, acclaimed director, beloved Hollywood icon, and patriarch of a family steeped in legacy. Instead, it turned into something else entirely. Something unforgettable. Something irreversible. As Romy Reiner opened the sealed envelope, the one marked, to be read only after my passing and only to my children, time seemed to freeze. The room, once quiet in grief, would soon erupt into gasps, disbelief, and ultimately, collapse. The first words were shocking, but it was the final line that destroyed Tracy. If something happens to me, Tracy must have no control over my legacy, assets, or public image. She's not who I thought she was. Let that sink in. Rob Reiner didn't just cut his daughter out of his will. He erased her from his legacy. Not by accident, not in haste, but as a final request. Deliberate, strategic, permanent. Tracy didn't scream. She didn't argue. She whispered just 7 words and fell. He didn't mean that he couldn't, but he did. And that's just the beginning. Because buried in that sealed letter wasn't just a legal bombshell. It was a trail of secrets. Decisions made in the shadows. Events the public never saw. Questions start swirling fast. Why would Rob exclude his daughter from everything he built? What did Tracy do, or not do, to deserve such a brutal dismissal? And how long had he been planning it? But perhaps the most haunting question of all, was Rob Reiner afraid of his own daughter? Because here's what no one was supposed to know. That letter wasn't the only thing left behind. There were backups, recordings, private notes, and a second, handwritten page, one that even Romy hesitated to read aloud. But we'll get to that. Right now, let's rewind. Because this wasn't a sudden decision. This was the end of a slow-burning war. One that started years before the funeral. And if you really want to understand how a father could cut his own daughter out of history, you have to start where it all unraveled. Hollywood. A place where appearances are everything. Where smiles hide secrets. And where even family can become a performance. In public, the Reiners seemed united. On red carpets, at premieres, at charity galas, always smiling, always proud. But off camera, things were breaking, cracks forming. Late-night phone calls, furious emails, shouting behind locked doors. Rob was aging, and he knew it. His estate, his scripts, his unfinished projects, his name, would soon belong to the next generation. And he wanted that legacy protected. But what happens when the person you thought would protect it becomes the one you fear might exploit it? What happens when your daughter, the person who shared your blood, begins making moves behind the scenes, talking to people you don't trust, showing up in meetings uninvited, rewriting your story before you're even gone? What happens when you can't prove betrayal, but you feel it? What would you do? Rob did what few dare to. He left behind a warning, a shield. That sealed envelope was his last line of defense. But even he couldn't have predicted what would happen the moment it was opened. Because for Tracy, it wasn't just about the money. It was about being erased. It was about waking up one morning and realizing your father no longer saw you as family. It was about losing everything, not in a courtroom, but in a single sentence read by your own sister. And that's where things get messy. Because Tracy didn't go quietly. She didn't accept it. She didn't sign the documents. She didn't leave the estate. No. She challenged the letter. She claimed forgery, manipulation, emotional distress, and then she made a claim of her own. That Rob Reiner was not in his right mind when he wrote those words. That someone influenced him. That someone turned him against her. That someone was Romy. The battle lines were drawn. Suddenly, the grief of losing a father became a war over his memory. Court filings, media leaks, anonymous sources, sealed documents dragged into public light. One side claimed protection of legacy. The other cried betrayal. And caught in the middle, a series of revelations no one was supposed to see. Including a recording. A confrontation between Rob and Tracy, captured months before his death. Their final argument. Their final goodbye. The tape that no one wants you to hear. We'll play parts of that later. But first, we need to go deeper. Because none of this, the letter, the will, the exile, happened in a vacuum. There's a history here. A slow fracture that began long before death. It started with a single missing script. Then a strange 3-day disappearance. A private investigator. A leak to the tabloids that Rob never addressed publicly. And eventually, the rewriting of Rob's unfinished memoir. Yes, you heard that right. Someone took his private manuscript, the one he was writing in secret, and released an edited version. Edited by someone close. He never said who, but he did file a copyright notice just days later. A new title, and a note scrawled in the margins. Truth matters, even if it's ugly. That was when everything changed. The legal arrangements. The meetings with new attorneys. The sudden silence between father and daughter. Rob never confronted Tracy publicly. He didn't take it to court. He didn't blast her on social media. He did something more final. He wrote her out. And he sealed it. Not with anger. Not with vengeance. But with heartbreak. Because for all his pain, Rob Reiner wasn't cruel. He was cautious, calculated, and determined to protect the one thing he loved more than anything else, his legacy. So when Romy opened that letter in front of the family, the air wasn't just heavy with grief. It was heavy with truth. A truth no one was ready for. And as Tracy fell to the floor, clutching her stomach, whispering, "He didn't mean that," Romy knew something else. Something even Tracy didn't realize yet. There was another page. And what it said would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What happens when grief turns into a courtroom? When what should have been a moment of mourning becomes a spectacle of betrayal. When a daughter hears her father's voice for the last time, through ink, not breath, and that voice doesn't embrace her, it erases her. That was the day everything changed. It wasn't stormy. No thunderclap. No cinematic lightning bolt splitting the sky above the Reiner family estate in Beverly Hills. It was a sunny California afternoon, calm, warm, too normal. But inside that living room, it felt like a thunderstorm was about to rip through the walls. The family had gathered per Rob's wishes. His death had shocked them. It wasn't unexpected. Rob had been sick, his health declining, but it was still surreal. The man who had directed Stand By Me and The Princess Bride, the man who mentored, protected, and pushed his children, was gone. And with his absence came silence. Heavy silence. Until Romy, with shaking fingers and a face drained of color, opened the letter. The letter, sealed in a pale cream envelope, labeled in Rob's handwriting, to be read only after my passing, in front of my children. There was no lawyer present. Rob had insisted it be personal, intimate. No cameras, no media, just family. So when Romy unfolded the single sheet of thick paper and cleared her throat, every breath in the room caught. Tracy sat closest to Romy, perhaps because she expected something kind, or because she knew something was coming. No one will ever know. But what followed was a moment that left no one untouched. Romy began to read. To my children, if you are hearing this, then I am no longer here. But this message is not about death. It's about legacy, about truth. I've built something in this life. And as I leave, I must ensure it's protected, not just by law, but by trust. He went on, talking about memories, about growing up as Carl Reiner's son, about carrying the Reiner name, and the burden and blessing of that legacy. But then, Romy's voice cracked. Her eyes locked on the next lines. Her hand shook. Everyone noticed. Even Tracy, who shifted nervously, biting the corner of her lip. And then it came. Tracy, my daughter, I loved you deeply, but love cannot blind legacy. And I can no longer trust you with mine. If something happens to me, you must have no control over my legacy, assets, or public image. You are not who I believed you were. I wish this were different, but I must protect what I leave behind. No one moved. Silence. Then a slow inhale from Tracy, one that trembled, like someone trying not to drown. She blinked. Once. Twice. No, she said under her breath. He didn't mean that. And then, before Romy could even fold the letter, Tracy stood, wobbled, and collapsed, falling sideways into a leather armchair, her hand clutching her chest, gasping. He didn't mean that, he couldn't. The room exploded. Romy dropped the letter. Jake Reiner rushed to Tracy's side. A cousin ran for water. Someone opened a window. Someone else called 911. But Tracy was conscious, just shocked. Her world had been ripped out in a single paragraph. And here's the twist. That wasn't the most shocking part. Because in the flurry of chaos, no one noticed what slipped from inside the envelope. A second page, folded smaller, handwritten, tucked behind the first. Romy saw it first, picked it up quietly, read it silently, and didn't say a word. Why? Because that second page wasn't meant for everyone. It was darker, more emotional, more unfiltered. It held the version of Rob no one outside the family saw. The version who wasn't the warm, funny director on late-night interviews, but the father who had felt betrayed by his own daughter. And Romy? She wasn't ready to read that part. Not yet. But let's pause. Because before we dive into what was on that second page, and believe me, it's explosive, we need to rewind. Just slightly. Let's look at the moments before that letter was opened. The subtle signs. The tiny earthquakes that hinted a disaster was coming. That morning, Romy had almost canceled the reading. I don't know if we should do this today, she told Jake. But Jake, always the fixer, said, Dad wanted it read. Let's honor that. We owe him that. So they gathered. The fireplace off. The curtains drawn. Tracy arrived last. Wearing all black, her hair tied back in a tight bun. No makeup. No jewelry. Her eyes, swollen. But her presence? Bold. Determined. Almost defiant. Romy would later say that in hindsight, it was as if Tracy knew something was coming. Like she came prepared to fight, not grieve. And maybe she did. Because what if Tracy had already seen the letter? What if someone warned her? A theory, sure, but not an impossible one. You see, Rob didn't write that letter the week before his death. He wrote it months earlier. And he stored it, in a sealed envelope, in a safe in his study. Only a handful of people knew about that safe. One of them was Tracy. Another? His assistant, Marla, who quit shortly after Rob's hospitalization under suspicious circumstances. But we'll get to that. Back to the living room. As paramedics arrived and checked Tracy's vitals, Romy clutched the second page of the letter, her hands white-knuckled around it, her lips sealed, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what to do. Read it aloud. Tuck it away. Burn it. Because what was written on that page could ruin everything. Not just for Tracy, but for Romy, too. Because Rob's final words weren't just about exclusion. They were about warning. About things Tracy had done. Things Romy knew parts of, but not all. There was mention of a file, a recording, a safe deposit box, and one phrase Romy would never forget. If she denies it, show her the footage. Footage of what? That, Romy didn't know. But in that moment, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a family split. This was a planned removal. Rob hadn't cut Tracy out in a moment of anger. He had done it with purpose. Deliberate. Quiet. Surgical. And that made it worse. Because if Tracy had shouted at him, if she had betrayed him once in a moment of rage, maybe it could be forgiven. But this was about trust. Broken over time. Eroded piece by piece. Until the only thing left was the seal of a letter no one wanted to hear. And as Tracy was helped into an ambulance, her face pale, her voice hollow, she turned to Romy and whispered one last thing. Tell them the truth. What truth? Whose truth? We were all about to find out. But first, Romy had to open Rob's private safe. Because locked inside was the beginning of a trail that would take this story from grief to full-blown scandal. A manuscript, a recording, a photograph, and a name that Rob had only written once. The name of the real reason Tracy was cut off. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What makes a man write something so irreversible? What pain does it take to look your own daughter in the eye? Or worse, to not. And still write words so final, so cold, that they feel like a blade pressed against the throat of memory. Rob Reiner wasn't a cruel man. At least, not publicly. Not historically. He was sharp, political, passionate. A Hollywood legend who built his career on stories that mattered. Stories about family, love, loss, hope. He could make a room laugh and cry within the same breath. But in his final days, he wasn't writing scripts. He was writing boundaries. And the most brutal of those came in the form of a simple letter. One that started formally, legally, even lovingly, and then swerved straight into heartbreak. This chapter is about that letter. The sealed one. The one he left behind for Romy, Jake, and Tracy, but which only two of them would truly own. Let's break it down. Because this wasn't just an angry parents lashing out. This was a meticulously structured message, one that reveals more about Rob than any filmography or interview ever could. And the deeper we go, the more terrifying it becomes. It began gently, even poetically. Romy later described the opening paragraph as disarming, like Dad was holding your hand before he let go. He wrote, "To my children, if you're hearing this, then I am no longer with you. And while my voice is gone, my words remain." This letter isn't about grief. It's about protection. Protection, not vengeance, not punishment. That word repeated itself 3 times. I must protect the work I've spent a lifetime building. I must protect my name, my ideas, my values, not for ego, but because they matter. Because I've learned, too late perhaps, that not everyone who shares your blood shares your intentions. Not everyone who shares your blood shares your intentions. That's not just a philosophical musing. That's a bullet, pointed directly at one person in that room. Tracy, Rob continued. Tracy, you are my daughter. I raised you. I loved you. I cheered your wins and comforted your pain. I remember the way you used to hide under the piano when you were little, thinking it made you invisible. I see that girl even now, but I no longer see her in you. That's the hardest sentence I've ever written. Let that breathe for a second. Because in those few lines, Rob didn't just cut Tracy out, he mourned her. He grieved the version of her that no longer existed in his eyes. But then came the pivot. And if the letter were a film, this would be the part where the music drops out and the lights dim. In the past few years, I have watched you make choices I cannot ignore. Choices that distort, diminish, and damage the legacy I've worked to preserve. Choices I would forgive in anyone, except the person I trusted most to carry it forward. Rob then laid out the consequences. Cold, precise, no gray area. Upon my death, Tracy shall have no legal claim over my estate, no control or authority over any intellectual property bearing my name, no participation in the execution or representation of my public image, past or future, no voice in the stewardship of my legacy. This is irrevocable, not limited access, not a reduced share. None. It was exile. Total and complete. But here's the part most people don't know. Rob didn't stop at legal instruction. He told a story, a specific memory, from just 2 years before his death. He wrote, "You stood in my office with a flash drive in your hand. You said, 'Let me clean up your story, Dad. Let me help shape the version that survives you.' I told you, I don't need editing. I need honesty." You smiled and said, "Not everything honest needs to be public." That moment haunted me. Why would it haunt him? Because in Rob's world, the world of storytelling, editing isn't just about grammar or structure. It's about power. Who gets to frame the narrative? Who gets to decide what parts of history are remembered and what parts are buried? Rob clearly believed Tracy wanted to control that narrative, and not in a protective way, in a strategic way, maybe even a self-serving one. He continued, "Since then, I've felt a presence. A quiet push to reframe, to sanitize, to reshape what I've built. It isn't loud. It's subtle. A suggestion here, a meeting there. People I don't trust asking questions I never gave answers to. All pointing back to you." Was Rob paranoid? Possibly. But what if he wasn't? What if he had reason to suspect manipulation? To believe that someone, somewhere, was pulling strings to prepare for his death before he was even gone? This letter suggests he believed exactly that. And he wanted to make sure it didn't succeed. He ended the first page with this. To Romy and Jake, protect what's real. Don't be silenced. Don't be guilt. Don't let nostalgia rewrite truth. You know the difference. I trust you to live it. And to Tracy, if there is love left in you, let this letter be the end of the battle. With grief, but not regret. Dad, that was the end of the official letter, but not the end of the truth. Because, as we now know, there was more. A second page. Folded smaller. Handwritten. Unnumbered. It wasn't included for legal reasons. It was included for emotional reasons. A raw, unfiltered stream of thought Rob had scrawled weeks later, after reviewing the final version of his letter. Romy described it as more intimate, more afraid, like a confession. We'll go through that next. But let's take a moment and ask, what would you do? If you were Tracy, sitting there, surrounded by your siblings, hearing those words, would you fight? Would you cry? Would you scream? Or would you go silent? Because Tracy didn't scream. She collapsed, yes, but not from shock. From something worse. From recognition. As if she knew it was coming. She just didn't want it read aloud. Because when words are whispered, you can deny them. But when they're read aloud, in front of witnesses, they become real. Permanent. And in Hollywood, there's one thing worse than being broke. It's being cut out of the narrative. Which is exactly what Rob Reiner did to his daughter. Deliberately. Elegantly. Brutally. But why now? Why not earlier? Why not in person? That's the mystery. Some believe Rob was afraid. Afraid of what Tracy would do if confronted too soon. Afraid of losing her entirely. Others think he hoped she would change, right up until the very end. But when the safe was opened and the recording was played, the hope vanished. We'll get to that soon. For now, understand this. That letter wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a farewell. To a daughter he no longer recognized. And a legacy he fought to protect. Even in death. But what was on that second page was even darker than anyone imagined. And Romy, standing by that fireplace, letter trembling in her hands, knew the moment she read it, that nothing would ever be the same again. Because the second page wasn't written in Rob's public voice. It was his private one. And what it revealed would tear open wounds that had been hidden for years. But before she could decide whether to read it aloud, the family found something else in Rob's study. A locked case. Unmarked. And inside was something no one expected. When did it really begin? That's the question Romy kept asking herself as she stared at her father's sealed letter and that handwritten second page she still hadn't shown to anyone else. Was it the day of the gala? The leaked script? The 3-day disappearance no one could explain? Or was it something older, quieter, like a crack in the foundation that no one noticed until the house began to shake? Because betrayals like this don't just explode overnight. They build. And if you trace them closely enough, you begin to see the pattern. That's what this chapter is about. Not the explosion. The fuse. The first real rupture came in 2019. At least, that's when Rob stopped pretending things were fine. He had just wrapped a tense press run for a political documentary that had received mixed reactions. Tracy had been working on a side project. A series of short films supposedly inspired by their family history. She told Rob she wanted to reimagine the Reiner name. He didn't like that word, Romy would later recall. He said the Reiner name didn't need reimagining. It needed remembering. The first warning sign? Tracy hired a new manager. Someone Rob despised. A slick, fast-talking fixer named Caleb Mars. Caleb had a reputation in the industry. Clean up reputations, broker shadow deals, spin controversies before they erupted. Rob called him a Hollywood vacuum. Sucks up truth, spits out product. But Tracy was drawn to him. He promised her more visibility, more brand power, more narrative control. That last one, that's the phrase that haunted Rob. He felt it in his bones. Someone was preparing a new story. One that didn't include him, or worse, one that rewrote him. And then came the gala. It was supposed to be a celebration. A private fundraiser for Rob's Film Preservation Foundation. All the Reiners were invited. So were dozens of industry icons, former castmates, studio heads. The kind of guest list that required 3 layers of security and a valet queue stretching down Mulholland Drive. That night, Tracy arrived late. She looked stunning, yes, but different. Colder, sharper, controlled. She didn't mingle much. Barely touched her champagne. Took a single photo with Rob, then disappeared into the back hallways with Caleb. What happened in those 47 minutes is still a matter of debate. But here's what we know. When she returned, she was flushed. Her dress strap was twisted. Her hands were trembling. She didn't say goodbye when she left. Not to Romy, not to Rob. The next day, Rob called a private investigator. That's confirmed. He didn't tell anyone why, not even his lawyer. But 2 days later, he changed the access code to his home office. And the month after that, he quietly began drafting a new will. That was the first betrayal. Not the letter, not the disinheritance. The realization that he was already preparing for war, while his daughter smiled for cameras. Fast forward 6 months. That's when things really began to unravel. Romy was the first to notice the missing pages. Rob had been working on a memoir, not publicly, not for a publisher, just for himself. A document titled Between Takes. Stories from behind the scenes. Thoughts on fatherhood. Regrets he'd never spoken aloud. He kept the handwritten notes in a locked drawer. Except one day, That drawer was found open, and a third of the pages were gone. He said nothing to the family. But again, he changed the locks. What he did say, to a longtime friend and producer, was this: "It's not theft. It's worse. It's censorship." And then, 3 weeks later, parts of Between Takes appeared online. Not as a leak, as a blog post. Polished, narrated, stylized. Posted on a website owned by a shell company tied to Caleb Mars. And the voice was unmistakably Tracy's. She had repurposed her father's stories, changed small details, smoothed rough edges, removed names that were once specific. In one version, Rob cried while watching Romy perform in her first school play. In Tracy's version, it was her play. Same quote, same stage, different child. It wasn't just a shift in narrative. It was a rewriting of memory. Romy saw it and wept. Jake saw it and called it what it was: intellectual identity theft. Rob? He didn't scream. He didn't sue. He wrote one line on a post-it and stuck it to his desk. "If they'll rewrite me while I'm alive, what happens when I'm dead?" That's when the safe was installed. That's when the letter was written. And that's when Rob began keeping everything offline. Then came the disappearance. The one everyone tries to avoid discussing. Tracy vanished for 3 days. No calls. No messages. No sightings. She skipped a family event. Her phone was turned off. At first, Romy thought maybe she'd gone off the grid, a wellness retreat, maybe. But Rob wasn't so sure. He had his assistant, Marla, pull hotel surveillance near Malibu, one of Tracy's favorite weekend spots. Nothing. Then, 2 weeks later, a photo emerged. Not in a tabloid. On a private burner phone that Rob kept hidden in his study. A candid shot of Tracy at an upscale restaurant. Seated with a known studio executive Rob had blacklisted from their family years ago after a decades-old feud involving stolen film rights. Tracy was smiling, leaning in close, holding a pen. Rob wrote in his journal that night, "She's not just distancing. She's trading." Trading what? We're not sure. But within the next month, 3 of Rob's oldest scripts, unproduced, never officially registered, were optioned by a streaming studio. The same studio that executive worked for. Coincidence? Romy doesn't think so. Neither do we. Then, finally, came the phone call. It wasn't recorded, but it was remembered. Rob called Tracy one evening after the leak. Romy was in the next room. She heard the tone shift. Calm to clipped. Clipped to cold. At one point, Rob raised his voice, not a shout, but close. "You don't get to reshape my life, Tracy. Not while I'm breathing." No one knows what she said in return. But when he hung up, he stood in silence for a full minute. Then looked at Romy and said, "She's already writing my obituary, and I'm still alive." From that day forward, their relationship was done. No more visits. No more phone calls. No more illusions. Rob made one final edit to his will. He inserted the clause that would become infamous. Tracy Reiner is to have no legal, creative, or fiduciary control over any material, property, or institution connected to my name, likeness, or voice. This restriction is permanent. And then he locked the letter in the safe, sealed the envelope, and told Romy, simply, "If I die before I finish the manuscript, read the letter first. Then check the drawer." The drawer. We'll get to that in the next chapter. Because what Romy found in there was a flash drive and a password-protected folder titled, "The Real Goodbye." But before we go there, just ask yourself this. If someone that close to you spent years rearranging your legacy while you were still alive, would you give them power over what happens after you're gone? Would you forgive? Or would you do what Rob did and build your truth in secret, one sealed letter at a time? Because now we know when it began. But next, we'll discover where it ended. And what was on that flash drive? It wasn't just words. It was proof. What happens when someone disappears and no one calls the police? No missing persons report. No media alerts. No frantic family press conferences. Just silence. That's what happened when Tracy Reiner vanished for 3 days in early March 2021. No one asked questions publicly. No one went looking. No one made noise. But behind the scenes, something was boiling. And when she came back, she wasn't the same. Let's talk about the disappearance that changed everything, and what she may have brought back with her. Because if you think this was just a mental health break, you're not paying attention. It started with a canceled lunch. Tracy had scheduled a rare one-on-one brunch with Rob, something she hadn't done in years. No handlers, no assistants, Just father and daughter. Rob agreed, cautiously optimistic. Maybe this was an olive branch. Maybe she was ready to rebuild. He even wrote about it the night before in his private journal. Meeting Tracy tomorrow. Hoping for peace. Expecting nothing. But she never showed. And not just for brunch. She disappeared. Her phone went dark. Her manager, Caleb Mars, claimed he hadn't heard from her. Her assistant said she was probably doing a solo retreat. Romy sent 2 texts. No reply. Jake called 5 times. Straight to voicemail. Day 1 passed. Then day 2. Rob wasn't panicking, not yet. He figured Tracy was being dramatic, pulling away again, punishing them with silence. But something felt different. Because she hadn't gone off-grid in years. Not since rehab. And even then, she'd left a trail. This time, nothing. No credit card activity. No Uber records. No email logins. Rob called Marla, his assistant, and told her to run a light trace. Within 6 hours, she called back, nervous. Tracy had checked into a private compound in Ojai under an alias. That compound, owned by a former executive from Shorelight Studios, the same streaming company that had mysteriously optioned Rob's lost scripts. Now ask yourself, why would Tracy go dark for 3 days and meet with a man her father loathed? Coincidence? Highly unlikely. Here's what we know. Tracy checked into the compound under the name L. Kellerman. She requested no phone access. She received 2 visitors during her stay. Both men. Both with ties to production financing firms. We're not suggesting anything illegal. But something was being brokered. And it wasn't therapy. When Tracy returned home, she didn't explain herself. She walked into her house like nothing had happened. Romy dropped by that evening, concerned. Tracy looked thinner. Eyes bloodshot. Hair slightly wet, like she had just showered or had been crying. She smiled, barely, and said, I just needed to disconnect. Then changed the subject. Offered wine. Played music. But the mask was slipping. She was fidgety, defensive, avoidant. And one thing stood out. A locked briefcase next to the couch. Romy asked casually, Is that new? Tracy stiffened. Just business stuff, she said, a little too fast. Nothing important. That briefcase would later become critical. Because, as we'll find out soon, its contents would be connected to a scandal neither side saw coming. But we're not there yet. Let's stay with the return. Rob didn't see Tracy for another 2 weeks. When he did, it was awkward. She visited the estate under the pretense of dropping off old family photos. But what she really brought was pressure. She sat across from him, calm but assertive. According to Romy, who overheard the tail end of the conversation, Tracy said something like, You don't need to be afraid of what I'll do with the Reiner name. I'll take care of it. Even better than you did. Rob's face went pale. Because in that moment, he realized. Tracy had a plan. And he wasn't part of it. The next 48 hours changed everything. Rob installed new locks on his study. He added a second safe. And he recorded a video. A private file, saved to a flash drive, labeled simply, The Real Goodbye. He told no one about it. Not until weeks later, when he mentioned it to Romy. If something happens to me, he said, that's the version of the truth I want told. When she asked what was on it, he just smiled sadly and said, It's not a movie, Romy. It's what came before the credits. But here's where things take a darker turn. Because a few days later, Marla, his assistant, quit. Abruptly. No warning. She left behind a note, short and cryptic. I didn't sign up to be in a war zone. I'm sorry. Romy tried to call her. No answer. Jake sent an email. Bounced. Marla had disappeared. And when they checked the security logs, they found that someone, using Marla's access code, had entered the house at 3:07 a.m. the night before she quit. The only room accessed? Rob's study. The only thing missing? A flash drive. But not the flash drive. That one, The Real Goodbye, was hidden in a decoy drawer behind a false panel in the desk. The one stolen? An older drive. One with early drafts of the memoir, audio notes, possibly legal correspondence. Tracy denied everything, swore she hadn't been in the house. But here's the problem. The surveillance cameras had been disabled, not turned off, wiped. And the only person who knew how to do that was Marla, or someone Marla had trusted. That was the last straw for Rob. He added a final clause to his will. He made sure Tracy would have no pathway to the archive, the memoir, the projects. He sealed the letter. And he told Romy, This isn't paranoia anymore. It's insurance. But Tracy? She acted like nothing had happened. She showed up at a charity auction the next week, all smiles. She posted a photo of Rob on Instagram with the caption, "Legends never die. I'll make sure of that." The comments were glowing. Fans assumed the Reiner family was united. Only Romy, Jake, and Rob knew the truth. The house was already burning. And the will? Was the fire escape. But we're still not done. Because that locked briefcase in Tracy's living room? Yeah, it reappears. Months later, when Rob passed and the estate battle began, Tracy was subpoenaed to submit all communications, agreements, and documents related to her father's legacy. She complied, mostly. But Romy remembered the briefcase. And when they asked about it, Tracy claimed it had been stolen. No police report. No insurance claim. No follow-up. Just gone. But a few weeks later, someone mailed an anonymous envelope to Jake. Inside was a single USB. No label. No explanation. On it, a recording. Date stamped. Time stamped. Tracy. Caleb Mars. Shorelight Studios executive. In a private meeting, discussing Reiner property and how to roll it out as legacy content once Rob passed. Tracy's voice is clear. He won't fight us. He doesn't have the energy. Once the estate clears, I'll have enough leverage to greenlight the slate. Greenlight the slate. That's how she saw it. Not as a tribute, as a content pipeline. And now, we were past suspicion. We had evidence. Still, Romy held off on going public. She needed to find out what was on the flash drive, the one labeled "The Real Goodbye." Because Rob hadn't just told her to protect his legacy. He left her a map. And the first clue was hidden in a black envelope inside the drawer with a note attached. For Romy, if she's still listening, what she found on that drive was devastating. Not just for Tracy, but for everyone. What happens when a man's most intimate truths, his raw thoughts, unfinished stories, and unfiltered memories, vanish without explanation? What happens when the words he refused to publish are suddenly everywhere, but twisted? That's exactly what happened to Rob Reiner. He didn't just lose pages. He lost control of his story. And what's worse, he suspected his daughter helped make it happen. This chapter isn't about accusations. It's about evidence. It's about what was stolen. And who benefited. Because what Romy found on that flash drive didn't just break her heart. It made her question everything. Let's rewind. Rob Reiner had been working on something deeply personal in his final years. Not a film, not a script, a memoir, but not your average celebrity tell-all. This wasn't ghostwritten. It wasn't made for headlines or TV deals. This was private, a document he titled Unfiltered. And it was just that, unfiltered. Painful chapters about his father Carl. Confessions about fame. Regrets about lost time with his children. Vulnerabilities no one had ever heard him say aloud. It was part journal, part roadmap, part emotional time capsule. He never intended to publish it, at least not yet. Romy called it Dad's real voice, the version he never showed the world. He kept the manuscript in two places, a printed version in a locked drawer and a digital version, encrypted, on a flash drive hidden inside his desk. But somewhere along the line, it disappeared. Romy found out the hard way. A month after Rob's death, a sleek digital e-book titled Reiner, Reflections of a Hollywood Icon, appeared on a well-known streaming platform's new memoir series. The cover photo was grainy, clearly pulled from Rob's early headshots. The publisher was vague, a curated tribute based on decades of interviews, recordings, and personal writings. No author, just assembled by the Reiner Legacy Collective. There was no such thing, and Romy knew it. She downloaded the file. She read it cover to cover, and with every chapter, her stomach dropped further. Because the tone was almost Rob's, but not quite. Details had been changed. Stories had been softened. And crucially, one chapter was completely missing. The one about Tracy. The one where Rob discussed the real turning point in their relationship. The night she approached him about releasing a sanitized, family-friendly version of his most controversial scripts. He'd said no. And she'd left the house in tears. In Reiner, Reflections, that entire memory was replaced by a glowing anecdote about Tracy helping him recover from illness. It was fiction. Beautiful, polished fiction. But fiction. That's when Romy knew. Someone had stolen the manuscript. And someone had rewritten it. But the question was, how? That's where the flash drive came in. The Real Goodbye. Rob's personal backup of the manuscript, voice recordings, and even a few secret video diaries. Romy plugged it into her laptop the night the fake memoir dropped. She had to know, what had they changed? And more importantly, what had they erased? She found a folder titled unfiltered_master_final. Inside were 23 chapters. She scanned them. Then her heart sank, because the chapter missing from the published version was present here. And the title? The Cost of Control. The opening lines read. She asked me, calmly, kindly, if she could help shape the story of our family. I told her the story had already happened. You don't get to rewrite the past just because you're uncomfortable with it. He went on to describe Tracy's efforts to soften his political stances, to reframe certain family tensions as artistic differences, to strategically remove references to their private fallouts. One passage hit like a hammer. I know what's coming. She's planning something. I can feel it. And the worst part? She believes she's doing it for the good of the family. As if legacy means image, not truth. Romy froze. Because these weren't vague fears. These were warnings. And then, in the margin of the final page of that chapter, Rob had scrawled in shaky handwriting. If this version ends up public, it wasn't me. But it did. And it wasn't him. So who leaked it? All evidence pointed to two names, Tracy and Caleb Mars. Remember that briefcase? Romy now believes it held the original printed manuscript. The one that vanished. The one Tracy could have scanned, modified, and sold, quietly, through a proxy. There was also that audio file sent anonymously to Jake. The one with Tracy discussing rolling out the legacy. And there was something else. Metadata. Romy checked the digital file of the leaked memoir. It had been edited by a user named Kellerman_PR. That's the same alias Tracy used to check into the Ojai compound. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. It was connection. Romy was furious. But she wasn't rash. She called the family attorney. She filed a motion. And she made one decision Rob would have been proud of. She uploaded his original manuscript. The full, unaltered, unfiltered, with a note attached. This is the voice of my father. Not the one polished for profit. It went viral. Fans, friends, former collaborators reposted it. The headline on Deadline the next day? Reiner releases Rob's true memoir, slams sanitized legacy project. Tracy? She went silent. No statement. No denial. No lawsuit. Just a quiet disappearance from social media. But the damage was done. Because now the world knew. Rob Reiner didn't want to be remembered as a myth. He wanted to be remembered honestly. Flaws and all. And someone tried to take that from him. Someone very close. But that's not where the flash drive ended. Because buried deep within the folders was another file. Encrypted. It took Romy 2 hours to crack the password. It wasn't a word. It was a date. March 7th, 21. The day Tracy disappeared. Inside the file? A video. Not long. Just 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Rob. In his study. Looking straight into the camera. Tired. Pale. But sharp. He said, if you're seeing this, I've either passed, or you're close to uncovering the truth. This video isn't for the public. It's for my children. All of them. If you're wondering why I made the choices I made in my estate, it's because I saw things I couldn't unsee. I forgave Tracy more times than I can count. But I can't forgive erasure. I can't let my story be twisted after I'm gone. So I wrote the letter. I recorded the audio. And I locked this drive away. Not to hurt her. To protect the truth. He paused. Looked down. Then looked back up. Romy, Jake, finish what I started. Not because I said so. Because you know it's right. End of video. Romy sat in silence for almost an hour after watching it. Then she called Jake. And together, they began planning something even bigger than the estate battle. A documentary. A legal challenge. A public reckoning. Because if Rob's words meant anything, they meant that truth shouldn't be up for auction. And that's exactly what was happening. But before they could go public, they needed one more piece. The confrontation. The one between Rob and Tracy. The one Romy believed was recorded, but never found. Until she checked the second flash drive. And when she played it, it wasn't a conversation. It was a fight. And the last thing Rob ever said to Tracy in that room would echo forever. What's worse, being cut out of a story or being written into it wrong? Because sometimes betrayal doesn't come with shouting, slammed doors, or lawsuits. Sometimes it comes wrapped in soft language. reworded memories, strategically edited paragraphs. Sometimes, it smiles at you from the dedication page of a book you never approved. That's what Rob Reiner feared most. Not slander, sanitization. And that fear? It came true. Because days after his death, a memoir appeared in the digital world. It looked legitimate. It sounded respectful. It even thanked Tracy Reiner, not as a contributor, but as a guardian of her father's legacy. But the truth? That memoir was a lie. Let's walk through how it happened. Because the leak wasn't random. It was planned, structured, and if Romy's right, it was executed by someone very, very close. We're talking down-to-the-minute timing. The fake memoir, Reiner, Reflections of a Hollywood Icon, dropped online just 48 hours after Rob's private funeral. That's fast. Too fast. It wasn't leaked. It was launched, digitally distributed through an anonymous publishing collective, but the files were traced back to a studio server affiliated with Shorelight Studios. That name again. And who had ties to Shorelight? Caleb Mars. And Tracy. Remember her 3-day disappearance? That Ojai retreat? Now we know what was being produced there. Not a script. A legacy. Let's talk edits. Because this wasn't just a change in formatting or grammar. This was a rewrite. Romy and Jake compared the leaked memoir to Rob's original manuscript, the one saved on the Real Goodbye flash drive. And the differences? Devastating. Entire themes had been replaced. The sharp political edges? Rounded off. The regrets about lost time with his children? Softened to generic reflections. And worst of all, the cost of control chapter, the one about Tracy's efforts to sanitize his legacy, gone. Just gone. Replaced with a flowery tribute chapter titled My Rock, the Quiet Strength of My Daughter. You read that right. The very person Rob explicitly wrote to exclude from his legacy had been rewritten into it as his anchor. Let that settle. Now imagine being Romy, reading those words, knowing your father never wrote them, feeling his memory twisted before your eyes. What would you do? Here's what Romy did. She released everything. She uploaded Rob's full, unedited memoir, unfiltered, to a secure public archive. She posted an open letter. It read, "My father left behind a story. Not perfect, not polished, but honest. The version currently circulating is not his voice. It's a performance. If we love him, we tell the truth. And the truth is, he didn't want his legacy shaped by image consultants or nostalgia. He wanted it real." That post exploded. Shared thousands of times. Major outlets picked it up within hours. Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, Deadline. Suddenly, the question wasn't, is this memoir touching? It was, who edited Rob Reiner's memory? The backlash hit fast. Within 72 hours, the platform hosting the fake memoir took it down. No comment. No refund. Just gone. Shorelight Studios scrubbed all mention of the project from their internal PR tracker. Tracy? Still silent. But not idle. Because days later, a cease and desist letter landed on Romy's desk, claiming she had violated joint copyright ownership, claiming Tracy had been co-author of certain pages in Rob's memoir. It was a bold move, and a dangerous one, because now she was claiming ownership of the very thing Rob had tried to protect. That's when Romy did something explosive. She released the metadata. She posted screenshots of the original document properties, timestamps, authorship logs, IP addresses, all pointing to one author, Robert Reiner, and one editor, Kellerman_PR, the same alias used by Tracy. This wasn't speculative anymore. It was forensic. The internet responded the way it always does when a story smells like scandal. They dug deeper. Users traced the publishing account used to upload the fake memoir. Guess what it was linked to? A production house registered in Delaware. A house co-owned by Caleb Mars and an anonymous investor, later confirmed to be Tracy's trust. So let's put the puzzle together. Rob writes a private memoir. Tracy disappears, meets with Shorelight execs. The manuscript vanishes. A tribute memoir drops online 2 days after Rob's funeral. It's traced back to Tracy's alias. Rob's original chapter about Tracy's censorship is missing, and then Tracy files a copyright claim against his own children. If that doesn't scream orchestration, what does? And still, Romy stayed measured. She didn't slander. She didn't drag Tracy's name. She let the facts speak. And then she released the audio. Yes, that audio. The clip recovered from Jake's anonymous package. Tracy's voice, clear as day, discussing narrative restructuring with Caleb. Here's the transcript. Caleb, you think he'll notice? Tracy, he's too tired. He's not even reading the emails. Caleb, we just need access to the clean drafts. Tracy, I already have them. It's just a matter of how we frame it. How we frame it. That was their plan. Frame Rob's story before the world could hear his real one. But they failed. Because Rob left a backup. Because Rob left Romy. Because truth, even buried, finds a way to rise. But here's the twist. As Romy was organizing legal defenses and media statements, she found something new on the flash drive. A hidden folder. Password protected. Simple title. Voicemail_1213.m4a. She clicked play. It was Rob's voice, groggy, quiet, older than she remembered. Romy, I'm not sure you'll find this. But if you do, I need you to know. I forgave her. I didn't trust her. But I forgave her. That's why I didn't destroy the drafts. I hoped, maybe one day she'd understand. Maybe one day you'll both sit together and read it, the real one. And maybe she'll say sorry. Not to me. To you. Romy broke down. Because even in his final moments, Rob wasn't cruel. He wasn't vindictive. He was tired, wounded, but still hopeful. Still a father. Still trying to bring peace to a family already split by memory. But the damage had been done. The fake memoir was gone. The truth was out. And Tracy? Still silent. But not invisible. Because someone else had seen everything. Someone inside Shorelight. And they had proof that went far beyond a single leak. Proof of intent. Proof of preparation. Proof that Tracy's plan may have started long before Rob was even sick. And when Romy received a plain white envelope on her doorstep 3 days later, she knew it wasn't over. Not even close. Because inside that envelope was a full transcript of a secret meeting between Tracy, Caleb, and a third unnamed executive. And what they discussed would shatter everything. What kind of father rewrites his will in secret? Not out of spite, not out of malice, but out of fear. That's what Rob Reiner did. And when you understand why, when you see the full picture, you realize this wasn't a decision made overnight. It was a slow, devastating process. One that broke his heart while he was still alive. Because to remove a daughter from a will, that's legal. But to remove her from your legacy, that's surgical. And what Romy and Jake discovered next proved Rob's final decision wasn't just about money. It was about erasure prevention. And someone had tried to stop him from doing it. Let's go back. After the fake memoir scandal exploded online, after Romy exposed the edits and the world turned its eyes on Tracy in disbelief, something strange happened. A small LA law firm, obscure, boutique, not on anyone's radar, reached out to Romy. The managing partner, an older woman named Eleanor Grant, had one message. I think it's time you saw the other will. Romy was confused. Other will? Eleanor explained. Rob had come to her office in secret nearly 8 months before his passing. He had requested a full overhaul of his existing estate plan. Not a tweak, not a codicil, a complete rewrite. One that nullified Tracy's role not just in his assets, but in any representational authority over his legacy. It went further than the sealed letter. It was sharper, colder, legally bulletproof. And the wording? Devastating. Here's the exact line. I hereby revoke and annul all previous provisions granting Tracy Reiner access to, authority over, or participation in any form of legacy stewardship, image licensing, archive control, or adaptation rights connected to my personal or professional history. The preservation of truth shall override bloodline. Let that sink in. The preservation of truth shall override bloodline. That sentence would later be quoted by dozens of op-eds, documentaries, and even a university ethics course on inheritance and legacy. But back then, it was a bomb. Romy asked Eleanor, why didn't we know about this? Eleanor hesitated, then said something chilling. Because someone tried to bury it. Here's what happened. Rob came to Eleanor Grant with a very specific request. Draft a new will. Ensure it included airtight clauses about legacy control. File it quietly. Notify no one, not even his primary attorney. Why? Because Rob feared someone was intercepting his communications. He believed his main legal team had been compromised, or at least pressured. He told Eleanor, there's a version of me being built behind my back. I can't stop it, but I can beat it to the finish line. Eleanor drew up the documents. Rob signed them. Everything was notarized, filed, and time-stamped. But then, weeks later, Eleanor received a legal challenge from Rob's own legal team. A letter claiming Rob had acted under duress and requesting a full review of the new documents. That's unheard of. Lawyers never question a client's own revision, unless they've been told to. And Eleanor suspected exactly that. Someone close to Rob had found out about the new will and panicked. Tried to get it buried. Who? Romy asked. Eleanor shrugged. But the letter challenging the revision had a watermark. KM and Partners. KM. Caleb Mars. Romy was stunned. Not only had Tracy's manager interfered in her father's legal decisions, he'd tried to have an entire will thrown out behind closed doors. But here's where it gets darker. Eleanor's team followed protocol. They notified Rob. Rob was furious. He filed a supplemental affidavit, 1 paragraph long, handwritten, scanned, and attached to the new will. It said, "I am of sound mind. No one is influencing this change but me. I am protecting my name from future distortion. If this will is challenged, look for the ones who benefit most from the edited version of me." That was the nail in the coffin. The challenge didn't hold up. The new will stood. But only Eleanor and Rob knew it had been finalized. And when Rob passed, she waited for a call from the family, for the usual executor handoff. But no one called, because Rob had never told his other lawyers that he had replaced them. That's how airtight he had kept the secret. Until now. Until Romy and Jake walked into Eleanor's office and saw it with their own eyes. The real will. The one no one expected. The one Tracy had zero legal standing to fight. But there was one more piece. An email, sent from Rob to Eleanor 3 days before his death. Subject line, backup plan. It read, "If anything happens to me before this will becomes public, ensure it is delivered directly to Romy Reiner. She'll know what to do. Don't trust any courier. Hand it over in person." Eleanor had waited for weeks after the funeral. Watched the headlines. Watched Tracy's silence. Watched Romy take the high road. And finally, she made the handoff. Along with the will came something else. A second sealed envelope, different from the one read aloud at the estate. This one, labeled only, "If she fights." Romy didn't open it immediately. She didn't want to. Not because she was afraid of what it said, but because she already knew. Tracy was going to fight, and Rob had prepared for it. Let's pause, because this is where the story shifts. This is no longer about family drama. This is about control, about the battle between truth and presentation. Because for all of Rob's planning, for all of his revised wills and hidden drives, Tracy had one advantage left: perception. She still hadn't responded publicly, still hadn't admitted involvement in the fake memoir, still hadn't acknowledged the edits, the metadata, the recordings. And some people still believed her version, still believed she was grieving, still believed she'd been betrayed by them. That's what made the next move so crucial. Because Rob hadn't just prepared one document. He'd prepared a sequence, a will, a letter, a flash drive, a voicemail, and now, a final message, designed for one moment only, when Tracy fights back. But what did it say? What final words had Rob locked away in an envelope marked, "If she fights"? Romy didn't open it alone. She waited until Jake arrived. She placed it on the table. She hesitated, then tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten, and at the top, it said, "This is not a legal defense. This is a moral one." And what followed wasn't a threat. It was a confession. Something even Romy didn't know. Something that would destroy Tracy's defense. And maybe, just maybe, explain the real reason Rob Reiner had cut her off. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. They say death brings closure. But sometimes it brings detonation. And the fuse was lit long before anyone saw the spark. For Rob Reiner, that fuse ignited on one quiet, elegant, glass-clinking night. A night that should have been filled with celebration. Instead, it ended with a private breakdown, a lost recording, and the final, irreversible fracture between father and daughter. This wasn't just a bad night. This was the night Rob Reiner decided to remove Tracy from everything. And what happened in those hours, between the red carpet and the empty study, would haunt the family forever. It was early November, the Reiner Retrospective Gala, a star-studded tribute hosted at the Directors Guild of America Theater. A who's who of Hollywood royalty had gathered to celebrate Rob's career. Dozens of his actors showed up. Executives, old-school legends, young talent he'd mentored. Rob hadn't been in the best health, but he'd insisted on attending. He even joked in his speech, "If you can't toast yourself while you're alive, what's the point of a eulogy?" Laughter. Applause. Even Tracy clapped. Front row, black dress, flawless makeup, and a radiant but unreadable smile. She looked like a daughter beaming with pride. But to Rob, she looked like a stranger. Because earlier that day, he'd received something. A quiet message from a friend at Shorelight Studios. A heads up that Tracy had been shopping around a pitch deck. Not for a film, for a legacy documentary. About him. Without his permission. He didn't mention it at the gala. Didn't say a word to Tracy. Didn't confront her in front of cameras. Didn't create a scene. He smiled. Took pictures. Accepted his lifetime award. But Romy said she noticed it. A slight twitch in his hand. An extra pause between jokes. The kind of silence that screamed something louder than any argument. After the final toast, Rob left early.